In today's episode, we'll look at generative AI tools like ChatGPT and the impact that they've been having on admissions since ChatGPT was first released in November 2022. We'll cover the benefits, drawbacks, as well as where the future of admissions could be heading with these tools that are now very widely available. Let's talk about holistic success. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Dore, co-founder and VP of Science and Innovation at Acuity Insights. Welcome to this episode of the Holistic Success Show. Here with me today is Dr. Nicolas Roulin, Professor of Industrial and Organizational Psychology at St. Mary's University, Faculty of Science and Psychology. I'm excited to talk to Nicolas today because he is an expert in personnel selection, and his research has led to more than 50 articles in peer-reviewed journals and over 100 conference presentations, as well as several books. Nicolas has a particular interest in how applicants behave during the selection process, including approaches to managing impressions and the way that interviewers and organizations attempt to detect and deal with faking. There are issues that are also common to higher education as programs are seeking to admit the best candidates that will thrive in their environments. So the topic that we're going to be talking about today is not only of particular interest in Nicolas and I, but admissions committees and applicants and communities are talking about the impact that these large language models like ChatGPT and Bard are having for the entire admissions process. So I'm really looking forward to digging into this more. Welcome, Nicolas.
Thank you for having me.
It is so great to have you on the show, and we really appreciate you taking the time. So let's get started. So, Nicolas, ChatGPT at the time we're recording has been around for a little over a year. What are the ways that it and other generative AI tools have already been changing assessment and the selection landscape?
Well, yeah, they have been around for about a year, or at least have been popular for about a year with ChatGPT and other tools like Bard, and there is new ones coming out every week. They definitely have changed the game in terms of assessment and selection, both when we think about graduate programs, for instance, but also organization hiring employees on a daily basis. It has changed the way both applicants think about the application and the assessment process, but also how organization, programs, test developers have been working on that. Obviously, those tools are extremely powerful, right? They are an immense source of resource and knowledge. They evolve all the time, right? So we started with GPT 3.5, it moved to GPT 4. Bard has come out as one of Google's tools. There's new ones that arrive. I think Google has one called Gemini, which is coming out, has come out very recently, and they get better and better. And so they are faster. They help change the way we do tasks on a daily basis. And if you think about selection or assessment, they change a lot of things in terms of how applicants can prepare themselves, how they can actually face an assessment or a test or maybe even an interview. And then also on the other side, when you think about the organizations or programs or test developers, it facilitates their work in terms of creating tests, generating new questions, or sometimes even assessing applicants at the end of the process.
It sounds like these are some really exciting opportunities when we think about creating more efficiency or even more access to preparation for application for applicants who may be coming from less resource backgrounds or who may be the first in their family to applying to higher education in some form or to a job in some cases. They may not have other folks that they can rely on. I've also heard, and I've actually talked to some programs who are using AI in what I think are really positive ways, using it to adapt or adjust some of the marketing materials that they have, or some of the things that can be really task heavy that they can do, where instead they could focus maybe on more of the mission that they're trying to accomplish at the school. Now, all of that to say, ChatGPT and others are not without some ethical concerns when we think about generative AI, especially when we think about higher education admissions for applicants and for programs themselves. What are some of the ethical concerns that have come up when we've talked about generative AI?
So I think it's important to start by saying that generative AI or large language models, whether that is ChatGPT or other tools, they are tools, right? So they can be used in many different ways. And like any tool, it can be used to do something good or something bad, right? You can use a hammer to build a house. You can use a hammer to kill someone, right? So obviously, you prefer that applicants and organization and programs are using those tools to improve the process. And they can do that. They can make it faster. They can make it more efficient. They can make it cheaper for the organization or the program. And they can also make it a lot more fair for job applicants or applicants for graduate programs. So that is very important, and that creates a lot of opportunities. But as you noticed, there are also ways where it can be used in less ethical or beneficial ways. And you were talking about people who do not have potentially the same kinds of resources to prepare themselves for an application process, right? It's very easy now to ask GPT to help you prepare your resume, or prepare a cover letter, or a statement of intent, or proofread it, or provide feedback on one you have, or maybe adjust it if you're applying to different programs that have different requirements, right? Instead of spending hours retyping your resume to adjust it, GPT can help you do that. And as you said, some people have access to resources. It can be friends or family members, professors, colleagues that can provide feedback, and others do not have the luxury of getting those resources. And GPT can become that friend, that resource. So in a way, it can replace a lot of the online resources that may exist for some people instead of going on Google and searching for things, but also in terms of accessing things that can be expensive, like tutors, for instance, or coaching services. But yeah, when you get to the more unethical or risky behaviors, there are things that can happen, again, both from the program perspective and from the applicant perspective. So one element that we've been looking into is whether those tools like ChatGPT can be a source for applicants to cheat or fake on assessments, tests, or even interviews, right? So if you have a question that is asked you, what prevents you from just going and asking GPT to provide the best answer or a potential answer to that specific question? Is it ethical to do that? Is it providing the program or organization the right information you want to be able to assess whether this candidate is the right fit for your program? It's questionable. And then you also have potential ethical concerns on the side of programs or hiring organizations or even test developers, right? So you can use GPT or other AI tools to help make the process fairer and faster, for instance. But you may also have some AI tools that do have potential risk of having biases. A lot of those AIs, it's less so a problem for like ChatGPT, which is based on tons of data, but a lot of in-house built AI tools, their quality depends on the data it's been trained on. So if you're training an AI model or algorithm on data that is, let's say, only white males, well, by default, it's going to create problems if the applicant is a black female, for instance, because the way they respond or behave, or their norms, or the way of approaching a scenario or a question may be different. And if the AI is trained only on certain type of data or people, it may evaluate people that are different more negatively. So that can create biases, that can create problems in terms of the fairness for applicants as well.
Absolutely. And I've seen even programs go to the extent of labeling on their website, if folks end up reading it, the way they, or the limitations around where they expect students to use AI in their application process. So trying to say, we know this is part of what you have access to. These are the areas that we find it appropriate to use. Now, that doesn't mean that those are the ways folks are using it, but they are trying to get ahead almost and thinking about, within our process, these are the ways we're comfortable with you using it, that they think actually does create a more equitable process versus, while still giving them the information that they need as a program. I'm curious though, do you think programs can use AI ethically as part of their selection process? I know we hear programs, some using it in very, very large ways to help them make decisions about their applicants, and some just very dipping their toes. And so maybe thinking about what are some of the ways that they can use AI that we might feel comfortable with, or that might feel like there's fewer ethical barriers in place.
Yeah, so I think it depends on what you use AI for as part of the selection process, because there are obviously a number of steps, right? It's from reviewing initial resume or cover letter or statement of intent, all the way to evaluating test and assessment, as well as interviews, for instance, or even assessment centers or exercises, role plays, whatever the program might be using. So theoretically, you could use a form of AI for any of those steps. Now, at the stage of where AI is now, there are steps for which it's probably more efficient and less likely to lead to problems. So as an example, if you think about the very initial stages where you have programs that oftentimes receive hundreds, if not thousands of applications, and obviously they cannot select that many, and it usually is very time consuming for them to review those statement of intents, transcripts, resumes, and so on. And if a program has a very clear set of criteria on which they want to evaluate the applicants, like, you need a minimum GPA of this, you need to have taken those courses, we want you to have those kinds of experiences, and so on and so forth. It would be fairly easy to design an AI system that could automatically go through the application material and score those elements in a pretty objective way. Obviously, that needs to be trained properly and tested and verified at first, but that could be a way to save organizations or programs a lot of time, resources, money, and that would not have a negative impact or unfair treatment of the applicants. So that would be one way it could be used very ethically. Theoretically, again, it could be used for other stages. Right? There is already organizations that do use that to automatically evaluate video interview responses, for instance. And they have models that would do that, where they basically just feed the video to an algorithm that evaluates them on a number of criteria that has been trained to do, and it spits out some kind of score or recommendation. And we only start to see some research evidence for how effective, fair, or justified such a process is. So there is a lot more that needs to be done. But I would assume that in the short run, or even in a few years, that may become more of the norm.
Nicolas, I'm curious. You talked about the asynchronous videos, and that seems, in some cases really exciting, and in some, probably to some people, fairly daunting. That a video of a human is being evaluated. And you mentioned, first of all, it depends what you're evaluating for, which is very true. But I'm also curious about how AI is useful when you might have diverse applicants with different experiences or different backgrounds coming and applying. And how does that impact your AI model?
That's a very good point. I think one of the limitations a lot of those AI models have right now, and even the big one like ChatGPT, etc., they are oftentimes trained on a very limited set of data, right? So if you are training your data set on a US sample, for instance, only, and then you start to use the same AI to evaluate applicants from, India, China, Brazil, Russia, wherever you want, of course there will be differences. Even if they're all speaking the same language, maybe the AI picks differently on accent, for instance. A lot of those tools rely on automatic transcription of what people say in the video into text, and so those tools work fairly well for a native speaker, but they struggle a little bit more if you are not a native speaker. I mean, they will struggle with me, I'm sure, but you can imagine someone who has a pretty thick accent, whose English is a little bit more limited, that may create some problems. So that's one thing. And then, of course, there's also, if some video elements are used, or even some sound or voice elements are used, it can play a role as well, right? So maybe AI picks on skin color, for instance, or on other elements that could lead to potential biases against certain groups of applicants. So that could be an issue. That said, I also want to emphasize that there is plenty of research showing that if you ask human raters to evaluate applicants, they're also prone to biases based on culture, based on race, on ethnicity, on age, on gender, on many things. And we've done some research on asynchronous video interviews recently, showing that there are some cultural biases as well when human raters are involved. So AI may be better, may be worse. We don't really know yet. It depends on many factors.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. And one of the biggest things that I would say is that we need to actually look at our data. So, whether or not we're using AI, whether or not we're using human raters, actually looking at the data and the impact of bias for different rating processes, whether that's, transcribed or on video, is something that should become part of our norm, and part of what we do to understand the impact of it. I totally agree. Do you see programs using ethical AI frameworks? So, for example, at Acuity, before we do any AI research, before we even started any, we actually created an ethical framework to guide us in our choices, in our research, and our decisions. Is that something you start to see creeping up across programs as they're doing it, or is that not yet where programs have gone?
I think it is starting. There is still a lot of variety in terms of how programs approach this. And this applies to also in organization more broadly. It's not just in education, right? It's also hiring more generally. I think one element that will, let's say, push programs and organizations a bit more towards more ethical use of AI is that legislation is evolving very quickly on that. A good example of that is last year, New York City had a new law that was put in place where basically they force organizations that are using some form of AI or automated assessment to have an external audit performed on them to make sure that their AI or the automatic assessment doesn't lead to bias against certain groups, for instance. I mean, it's an oversimplification of the law, but just to give you an idea. And I'm pretty sure that similar legislation will pop up in other states in the US. Canada has a bill that they have been working on for a couple of years that also has some rules about how AI can be used. Europe has the GDPR regulations that have also very strict rules about how to use AI. So I would assume a lot of those things will push organizations and programs to be a lot more ethical and careful and also transparent in the way they use this technology.
Absolutely. And I think it's the transparency that will help the community become more understanding and accepting of where it's used and what it's used for. So when it comes to applicants, and I mean, you can extrapolate to job applicants or applicants to higher education, can and should they use AI? And we've talked about a couple of examples, but maybe you can expand on that a little bit. I'm sure you've done some thinking.
Yeah, I think they should, but they should do so responsibly, right? Again, I'm going back to the point I made earlier. AI is a tool and you want to use it. You want to use it to help yourself to be more efficient, to save you time, to help you level the playing field if it's necessary because you don't have the same resources as maybe other applicants have. But then we need to draw a line in the sand in terms of what is acceptable and what is not. So for instance, if I'm applying to a specific, let's say, medical school, it's totally fine to use ChatGPT or other tools to learn more about that school, to try to figure out what kind of questions or tests I may be asked to go through, maybe to help me draft my statement of intent or my resume or cover letter or whatever is required so that it fits maybe the culture, the needs, the requirements of that specific programs. Now, if I'm completing an assessment, a test of personality or qualifications or competencies or even an interview, and I'm asked a question I'm not sure how to answer, going online and asking ChatGPT for how to best solve that problem or answer that question, then that opens the door to a bit less ethical behavior, right? And some of the work we've been doing is trying to see if people are using those tools to cheat or to fake on assessments. And this becomes a lot more problematic because obviously if you have an applicant who just gets all their responses from ChatGPT, but they actually would not have scored very well at all if they were performing the test on their own, and they end up being admitted in a program, for instance, well, what are the long-term repercussions, both for the program, but also for the applicant themselves, right? So the program may be admitting someone who is not qualified or maybe not a great fit, and they may struggle in the program. They may have to leave, or they may have to spend a lot of extra time and resources to complete their program because they're just not ready for it. And then for the applicant themselves, right? Maybe they would have been a better fit for another program, and they just ended up in the wrong one because of this cheating behavior. Or maybe again, they will be in the program and they will have to spend a lot of extra resources to, succeed because they made their way through that cheating process.
Absolutely. I like the analogy of AI being a tool and thinking about, what is your toolbox that you have as an individual, and using, whether it's ChatGPT or one of the other AI pieces to fill out that toolbox in places where it's not compromising the integrity of your application, where it's, supporting you. I often think of, there's so many schools or programs, it can be daunting to even know where to apply for an applicant. And ChatGPT or another AI system is a great example of, you can find out, what are programs related to political science that are offered in this geographic region or something, and to get a sense of what is out there as an opportunity for you. And you may find something that does more align to what you want. So, we've talked a little bit about what academia is thinking about. We've talked about industry, whether that's in employers or, I've mentioned sort of the framing we've taken here at Acuity, trying to think about how do we do about this ethically. How do you think academia and industry could collaborate to maximize the advantages of using AI and overcome some of the challenges in AI in admissions? Are there opportunities there?
Definitely. Both industry and academia, or practice and research, if you want, they have their own set of expertise, knowledge that they can bring to the table, and collaboration just will bring the best of both sides. If you think about academics, they will have a lot of knowledge about existing theories and empirical research and evidence about a specific issue, right? So in my example, I do a lot of work on selection and deception and faking and cheating. So I can, collaborate with an organization and at least share what we know from research in terms of, which kind of applicants are more likely to cheat? How do they cheat? What are the contexts and situations that make it easier or harder for people to cheat, etc., etc.? And we also have expertise to help organizations potentially design ways to test specific problems in the field, in their context, using their tools, using their assessment. And on the other hand, obviously, the industry has tons of expertise in terms of developing, using, testing tools and assessment, in terms of managing the process with job applicants, in terms of understanding how applicants experience a certain process, what they like, what they don't like about a certain tool model, or maybe restrictions that are imposed on them. They also obviously have their own questions and issues that need to be solved. And sometimes, us as researchers, we have our little ideas from our lab that we discuss in a little bubble, but we may forget that there are practical concerns that companies and organizations and graduate programs have, that we may be able to help solve. We just haven't thought of them. So we need to have a conversation with industry to understand what their needs are, what their expertise is, and how we can contribute. And obviously, another thing that is very important is that a lot of industry specialists, they do have a ton of data about real applicants going through real selection process that are incredibly useful for researchers to actually work on, right? A lot of times when I talk to organizations and programs or test developers, they don't even realize that, oh, we have this data set of 100,000 applicants. And for us, it's crazy because we run our little lab experiment with 200 people, and that's already difficult to access because it's complicated to create and build and pay and etc. So when we can work on large data sets that have real applicants' data that are motivated to do well, that have an incentive to succeed because they want to enter that program, for instance, that's always very exciting to actually work on.
Nicolas, you just spoke my language there. As somebody who sits both in academia as well as industry, you talked very beautifully about the potential interaction and how the two sides could, with obviously ethical approval and all of those things, since we're talking about it, work with each other to expand on what we're doing and sort of create a multiplier effect, which is really exciting. We've talked about a lot of things today. Now, what I know for certainty is that the field of AI is still changing fast. It's going to be moving fast. What we see today is not going to be tomorrow. So I want to end with the question of, what future do you see for using AI and making selection decisions? If you had a magic ball, what do you see in the near or longer term future?
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna avoid using my crystal
This
ball right now, but
based on your data.
yeah, no, I think one thing you've mentioned is that AI evolves extremely quickly. Like if you think about what we knew about AI 1 year or a year and a half ago, and I'm not talking about AI expert who obviously knew a lot more, but the general population who doesn't work on AI or develop AI themselves, and what we know and what we have available right now, it's incredible how much it has evolved in just the period of like a year and a half. And then there are new tools that pop up, and there are systems that evolve. Like a good example, if you look at ChatGPT, the version 3.5 that they've made available a year ago and that is still freely available, and then the version 4.0 that has come out a few months later, there is a ton of research showing how different the two are in terms of effectiveness, how well they can respond to a number of different questions. A lot of researchers have tried to play and say, let's ask, GPT 3.5 or GPT-4 to beat that test, and GPT-4 systematically does better than others. So already that is a good example of how things evolve. But then you have AI that can generate images very easily now. Tools like DALL-E, for instance, does extremely well. The new versions of GPT can not only analyze and manage text data, but you can enter videos, you can enter pictures, and it can read those, understand those, interpret those, and give you insights about them. So a lot of things that may not be possible right now, both in terms of organization and programs and test developers to use AI to improve their processes, may become possible in a year or two. And in the same way, something that feel like it's very complicated for applicants to do may be very easy to do in a few years. And that could be good things, right? That can, again, give them better tools to prepare, to practice, to improve, to be more efficient. But that can also open the door for things that are more on the dark side, cheating and faking, that for now we are like, well, that's not something AI can do yet, but it can do that maybe in a few years. I've seen examples of people having questions that are live streaming to GPT and then automatically transform from text to voice. And then you would have the computer basically answering the question for you. And you have to just basically leap with it and then just pretend that you are giving the answer. But it's a computer reading a text that another software has generated basically live 2 seconds ago. And again, right now it still looks very robotic and not very realistic. But we can imagine that in a few years, all those things will be a lot better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it'll be interesting to see what the future holds. I know we're all going to be paying attention. Nicolas, thank you so much for sharing your insights today and for a really great discussion. To all of you, thank you so much for watching and listening. If you haven't subscribed to our show already, please do so and share this episode with any colleagues who you think might find it useful. And with that, we'll catch you in the next episode. If you enjoyed this episode of our show, please be sure to check out the other episodes. And don't forget to subscribe. We have a new episode releasing every week.